On July the 23rd, as was widely expected, Boris Johnson was elected the new leader of the UK's Conservative Party and shortly afterwards became Prime Minister. The first thing he did was appoint a cabinet full of Brexiteers and loyalists, all apparently committed to taking the UK out of the EU on the 31st of October with or without a deal. And in light of this, fears have been resurfacing, the same fears that appeared in February-March, that the UK is heading for a no-deal crash-out at the end of October. Now, we think these fears are mostly overblown. In the first place, we reckon there is a coherent majority in Parliament which is ready and willing to do whatever it takes to stop the UK leaving the EU without a deal, whether by forcing an extension by some parliamentary route or another, or if necessary by voting no confidence in Boris Johnson's government and voting them out of office. It's easy, though, for Brexit analysis to become overly bogged down in parliamentary arithmetic. The important thing to remember is that even if Parliament fails to block a no-deal Brexit, it will still only take place if the government actively prefers it to leaving with a deal. The reason for this is that Parliament sees no deal as just about the worst option, the worst of all possible options. That means that the government will always be able to blackmail it into a last-minute cliff-edge ratification of whatever deal it's offering, so long as there are no other options left available to Parliament. So, the important question is, what does Boris Johnson want? What would his government prefer? To leave the EU with a deal or without one? The noises that have come out of the first 10 days of the new government have been quite confrontational. They've been stressing their willingness to leave the EU at the end of October with or without a deal, and have been ramping up the UK's no-deal preparations. They've also said they're not going to engage in any renegotiation with the EU unless the EU agrees to bin the Northern Irish backstop, which is just a non-starter. Still, when push comes to shove, we think that this government will prefer a deal to no deal. We think that they won't want to take the gamble of a no-deal Brexit with all the uncertainty and the likely economic shock that would entail. We also think Boris Johnson will be reluctant to admit that his buccaneering approach and willingness to stand up to the EU couldn't achieve anything more than Theresa May did over the course of her 3 years in office. All this points, for us, towards Boris Johnson renegotiating something with the EU in the limited time available and selling this as a great victory. One way or another, though, almost all roads now lead to a general election. If the government does manage to blackmail Parliament into a last-minute cliff-edge ratification of its New Deal, we think they will want to go to the polls at the very latest by next summer in an attempt to secure a larger majority with which to govern effectively. If, on the other hand, they seem set on pursuing no deal, we expect Parliament to either force an extension, in which case the government will probably call an election off their own bat, or vote them out of office with a vote of no confidence. In both of those scenarios, the UK would be heading to a general election in November-December. So one way or another, the UK is heading back to the polls. Now, what does all this mean for UK assets? Our strategist Oliver Brennan thinks that after the failure of May to pass her deal at the end of March, markets started pricing more political risk for the UK, including into the scenarios where the UK leaves the EU with a transitional deal in place in an orderly manner. We now see sterling going to about 120 against the dollar in the event of a no-deal Brexit, and rallying to around 130, 135 in the event that a deal is ratified. So that means most of the currency risk of a no-deal Brexit is already in the price. But we think the next few months are going to be volatile, and so while we're constructive on sterling in the longer term, we downgraded it in our most recent asset allocation from positive to neutral.